All right, welcome to the instructor section on qualitative interviews as data collection strategies. Here we're going to go over, we've already done observation. You should have, if you didn't go out and already do the actual observation exercise, be sure not to put that off, okay? But here we're going to go over the next part that will be relevant to your research plan. And there's some tips I want to go and suggest for ways to go and make sure you have an interview that runs as smoothly as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Now, what are some of the benefits of interviewing in the first place? I tell you as a part of this research study that you need to do it, but you know, a reasonable question is, why is it any good? Well, you can't always go and observe behavior. Sometimes it's very difficult to be able to observe, a set of emotions that someone may have. What if you're not there on the particular day that something happens? It's good to be able to go back and ask questions on that. It allows you to move back and forth through time. You can go and ask a person's perspective on the way something has developed over a period of time, and an observation will not lend that same kind of insight. And it helps focus on the individuals. If you're talking about interviewing someone and asking for their perspective as an individual or as a member of a particular contextual community, people many times want to go and contribute that kind of information. So this kind of focus really helps. Okay, so there are lots of different questions you can ask, but there are certain kinds that it's just a good idea to avoid. All right, now the thing about listing interview questions, you want to go and write them out, and you may be going through 2 or 3 drafts of these, and that is so the kind of questions you ask people will get them to talk. You want them to talk. You don't want them to feel threatened by your questions, or you don't want them to give you some little terse answer. And so, here's some questions to avoid. Multiple questions, meaning, you don't just ask one, you ask another, or you ask one, and then before they have a chance to begin to address it, you ask another question, and then you say something else and you ask another question. Stick with one question at a time. Leading questions, stay away from those. An example here is, why do you dislike non-traditional students? This assumes that the interviewee actually dislikes non-traditional students. That may not be the case at all. But if you go and you ask a question like this, it encourages them, or not encourages them, that's not the right way to put it. It makes them want to just give you a very short, summarized answer, and you don't want that. Yes or no questions, avoid those, because that's going to be the general kind of question that you get. Okay, what are some of the reasons to avoid these in the first place? Okay, it narrows the response of the interviewee. Your goal in interviewing someone, whether it is an individual or a focus group, is to get them to talk. Because when you analyze what they have to say, you're not going to get those little chunks of data in 1 or 2 word responses. You're going to get them out of a larger narrative. It possibly prohibits their revealing why they have the opinion or experience they do about your subject. It's very easy for students as well as adults to feel like they're being put on the spot, and instead of giving you a genuine and authentic answer, they're looking more for the right answer or the correct answer, and you don't want that for an interview. Okay? It promotes the perception that you are only looking for a particular answer, kind of what I just said. You want them to talk. You want to create an atmosphere where they're comfortable in doing that. So what are some of the basic kinds of questions that you can ask? Okay, experience behavior. Okay, here's an example over here on your right side. What are the most memorable experiences you had as whatever it may be? What did it feel like? An opinion or value question is always a good one to go and ask, because in asking that promotes their ideas that what they have to say is valid, and that's the way you want to treat it. Knowledge questions, okay? Ask them where they have a level of experience, expertise, or just general knowledge. Sensory questions, okay? Why do you prefer natural light in your photographs, as an example? Why do you prefer plants in your classroom? Why do you prefer songbirds in your classroom, or whatever the case may be? You know, again, this is the kind of question that encourages them to talk. You're wanting them to elaborate. Feeling questions. These are more emotional in nature, but absolutely essential. How do you feel when you were being evaluated? I think most teachers could answer that. It would roughly be the same, but that may be supposition on my part. Background questions. These kinds of questions can really get people to open up about their experiences. Whenever you go and do any kind of set of interview questions, an important thing to remember is people don't just go into an interview and they start talking. I would structure warm-up questions through the interview to start it out with. You want to kind of grease the wheels just a little bit. So if that means that you structure your interview with certain kinds of questions that would just sort of get people to talking, and then you get on to the main body of what you're wanting to discuss, that can be a very effective strategy. There are lots of times when late night talk shows will have a comedian that will come in before the show ever starts. Their job is just to grease the wheels, to go and put the audience members in a lighthearted, laughing mood so that when the host comes on and the guests, then things are actually funny and the show does what it's supposed to do. So preparing for the interview, okay? Have appropriate questions ready. You want to go and plan these out ahead of time. Now, through the course of the assignment for this class, I would suggest anywhere from 12 to 15 of these questions. Okay? You don't want to do a lot. You want to structure these questions so that if you don't get to all of them, you have some that still address the core of what you need to. So having a primary and a secondary list is probably a good idea. Okay? Confirm the time, place, and purpose of the interview. Communicate this ahead of time. What I have always done is I will email or call the person the day before and confirm that we are going to be meeting, because, I mean, people are busy and you don't want to be stood up because you're busy yourselves. There are times where I have also emailed the list of interview questions to the respondent, to the interviewee, before we ever met. The idea behind this is so that they didn't go into this cold or unprepared. They would have at least a chance to look over it and kind of think about what they were going to say. Now, some people will say, no, don't do that. It's my opinion that it is only an asset to do that. Okay? Give the respondent pertinent information. Tell them exactly what you were doing and why you're collecting this information. Ensure the comfort, anonymity, and the use of the findings, meaning their identity is always a secret. That is law. That's the way it has to be. They have to be assured that you will not use their name in any kind of public way. There's a difference between, you know, going and disseminating what someone said against their will versus if they say, oh yes, you can use this, you have my full permission to do this. Okay? Pertinent tools: recorder, tapes, batteries, paper, pen. If you happen to do this on video, go for it. Just make sure everything is set up, that your batteries are strong, and that you are ready to go. You don't want to have to stop periodically through the interview so that you can adjust the equipment. If you need to stop the interview so maybe they can get a drink of water or go to the restroom, that's fine. But you don't want this to happen on your account. That makes them feel like you're wasting their time. So beginning the interview. All right, here's some issues to go and look at. You're going to want to address these just in case the person doesn't know. Sometimes people can be a little skittish about sharing a lot of information that may apply to school policy or the classroom or their own teaching. So again, share what your intentions, motives, and purpose are for this particular interview, especially if you're going and interviewing someone that is outside of school. Let's say a teacher you don't work with, or a parent, local community member, school corporation administrator, along those lines. Protection of the respondents through pseudonyms. Make up something. Let them make it up for you, whatever you're comfortable with, but their identity has to remain anonymous. Who has a say over the final study? In in member checking, what you might do is give them a copy of the interview transcript that you acquired and ask them to read it and make sure that what they said and the information that you gathered and that you will use is accurate. You're also going to want to say that, you know, when you have checked this, I'm going to have the final say over what is published. Okay, agree to that. Now, if that is something that they are not comfortable with, see if you can work out a solution. Or you may have to decide whether you want to use them as an interviewee. But you don't want any tension later down the line after you've gone through the trouble of interviewing and analyzing the data. Payment, if there's any, usually there's not, but you know, sometimes. The logistics of the interview. You know, where are you going to meet? What time? For how long? Etc. You don't want people showing up and then looking at their watch the entire way through. The pleasantries, the opening pleasantries, you know, it's worth taking time to just say, I really want to thank you for meeting me. This is an important project, and so I really do appreciate your time and input. That matters to people because it validates their participation in this. And it kind of sets them up on a little bit of an expert level, and there are lots of folks that really appreciate that. Okay? Allow the responses to be open-ended. Don't be too prescriptive about this. You want the conversation to flow. You want it to be relaxing. You want them to want to talk to you about this. Okay, maintaining productivity in an interview. You can go and have an interview occur where things are so relaxed that you tend to go and stray off the path a little bit. That's something that you want to guard against. So, you know, and manners just come into the picture. That's just the best way to put this. Be natural, honest, and open about what is going on. Listen for cues. You know, you may have a particular question that you have asked that is essential. You may have another question that you have asked that is essential, but then they may go and make a remark or say something, and you may think, oh, I need to follow up on that. So listen for those kinds of cues. Because going into an interview, you can't possibly know everything to ask and everything that you should anticipate for their answers. So be aware of what's going on as you're going through it. Keep in mind, and I wish I could underline this on this page right here, keep in mind that the respondent is the expert, not you. You may feel like you know a ton more about this particular subject than they do. That doesn't matter. You're interviewing them for their perspective. Okay, they are the expert. If they're answering you and when you're asking them questions, you want them to feel comfortable. So as they are talking, some people process it where a person's talking and they might say, uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Don't do that. That tends to really sort of rush people along and make them feel ill at ease. So just you want this to be a, you know, properly mannered, governed discussion. Be a listener and a learner. Remember that he or she is the interviewee and you are the interviewer. Don't swap stories. If they have something they say, don't get into a mode where, oh, I know what you mean. And I had an experience like that when I was teaching 5th grade social studies. That you don't want to do that. Okay? Now, if they're not wanting to talk, and you can use this as a way to make them feel a little bit more comfortable, then it would be relevant to do, but not as a practice for conducting an interview. Achieving closure, okay? Begin and end in a positive fashion. Thank them both times. Inquire as to whom else might have insight into this topic. If you talk to a principal, ask if they have any suggestions. If they may give you someone, they may not. But you never know where you're going to end up if you don't ask that question. And then keep the doors of communication open. May I contact you if I have further questions? Or when I have this transcribed, may I show you the transcript so that you can look at it? Also a good idea. One last thing that I want to go and throw in here. The last question that you ask in an interview, let's say you have a dozen questions and you go to all of them. The last question you might say is something like this. Is there anything that I have not asked you that you would like to comment on? That is the single best question to leave off or leave an interview off on. I've done that, and I have gotten such insightful comments from people, and I realized I didn't even think of that whenever I formulated my interview questions. So that's something to think about. Well, this is the end of the interview instructor video. It's going and developing your list of interview questions. Remember, you don't want them to be close-ended. You want them to be open-ended. You want them to get to talking. You don't want them to be leading. You want them to be the kind where you get more of a narrative, because the narrative component of this transcript is going to be what you go and analyze as part of your study. Now, there's also going to be an additional instructor video on common types of errors that occur when people interview. And this is on the part of the interviewer and the interviewee. So be sure to look for that. It will also be available to you. Look at that as you are going through and developing your questions. And again, if you have any questions for me, you know how to get a hold of me. That's it. Have a good day.